good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you are. I appreciate you and yours for hanging out with me and mine for just a few minutes of your week. We have a very special guest. His name is Stephan Foust. He is an author that lives here in the mid-state. He is a native of Indiana. In 1979, Stephan Foust walked 3,506 miles. Yes, that's cross country from North Carolina to California. We'll bring him on in just a second. First up, I'd like to thank everyone for rocking with us always here on the Surround Sound podcast, streaming, download via your favorite reputable podcasting platform, and of course, following us via all social media. Just make sure you search Surround Sound Podcast. Now, our guest for today, for this week, he's a former teacher. He's a former professor and media professional. He's authored 3 books, and his latest we'll talk about today. It is entitled A Leaf in a Stream. Please welcome my very special guest, Mr. Stephan Foust.
Can you hear me?
How you doing, Mr. Stephan Foust?
It's good to be here. Thanks for having me.
Hey, no problem at all. Full disclosure, I've known Mr. Foust here for a long time. He is he's one of the good ones. I'll say that just to sum it up. He's one of the good ones. Mr. Foust, you wrote a book. Now, it's a novel, but it's based on real life experiences. Tell us, why did you write a leaf in the stream that way?
Well, it's historical fiction, and I guess probably the better way to describe it would be historical faction. It is, you said, based on true life events, things that happened to me during my 3,500-mile hike across the United States that you mentioned earlier. And I could have written it first person, but for a couple of reasons I chose not to. One, being a journalist and a former college professor, the idea of writing a book or anything, frankly, in fact, where I was a part of the story and used the word I over and over again didn't have much appeal to me. But the big thing was, if I wrote it third person, then I could get into the heads of other characters and tell the story from their points of view. And that was very important for me to do. I did this walk across the country 40 years ago. And then in all that time since, many of the main characters in this book and a lot of the side characters too, I've had continued contact with, and they told me the story from their point of view and what was going through their head. Excuse me a second here. And sorry about that.
No problem.
What I decided to do was just to go ahead and get into their thought bubbles and let them tell the story through their points of view, and that way I could actually expand the story far beyond just my story about walking across the country.
Yeah, give us a more, I guess, a holistic view of this experience that was shared by more than just you, I take it. Is that correct?
Yeah, to give you an example of that, for example, when I started off to do this, the idea of walking all the way across the United States, blowing myself up from my job, selling everything that I owned, and spending 18 months on the road like I did was a pretty audacious thing. And it was also a pretty selfish thing. But back then, as a younger man, I just viewed it through my prism. And I didn't realize what it was doing to other people, that it was having an effect on other people, like my parents, for example. And eventually they told me their stories and their perceptions of everything that was going on. And I realized what I really put them through.
Mm.
And part of that story was my dad was a World War II veteran, with combat veteran with post-traumatic stress syndrome that all of us had kind of lived with. And he had never really told anybody in our family what the origins of that were, or the dreams that he would have at night and that sort of thing. But when I got out there doing this walk, and I would start to have the blues and feel kind of down on myself and feel kind of alone in the world, and we didn't have cell phones back then, so I had to find a telephone somewhere. There were a number of telephone calls from phone booths around the country back to my folks, where I'd be talking to my folks, and at some point my mom would get off the phone, leaving just my dad and I on. And gradually what occurred as I walked across the country is that more and more he came out and told me his World War II stories. And it kind of bonded us together in a way that we hadn't been bonded together before. So I wanted to make that a part of the book, and I wanted to present it from my father's viewpoint, not necessarily my own. So that's why I went about the approach of the book the way I did.
Excellent, excellent. And I'm glad you brought up your family, because as we get into part one here and we continue, I definitely want to hear more about your family and what your family's thoughts of you literally traveling cross country. Okay, so chapter 6, in this first part, the beginning of your book, Leaf in the Stream, the Big Dare. Now, a student dares you to essentially seek the trail of the old Westerners, to walk the same trails that they did. How did you feel about that initially? Because two characters, Weeble and Critter, basically give you this dare, pronounce this thing to you. How did you feel about it?
Well, I was very close to both those guys. To give you a little bit of the backstory, they both played on I was at the time a junior high school teacher and coach. I coached football and track, and those two guys were on both my football team and my track team in particular. That's where they really excelled, and I'd gotten quite close to them over time. So I think they kind of felt like they had certain freedoms to speak their mind with me that other students would have been a little bit more closed mouth. And backstory on me is that during those years that I taught, I used my summers to go out and adventure. I go into all the different Western national parks. I went down into Mexico. I took hang gliding lessons. I took skydiving lessons, just a whole variety of different things. And what I would do when I would come back then in the fall and start to teach and coach is that I had a side gig, and that was writing for local newspapers and telling these stories, telling these adventure stories and stuff. So I had already stuck a foot in the world of journalism and was increasingly liking it more and more and more. So there was that going on. Like I said, I like to hike. I like to backpack. I like to do all these things that I could anytime I had any time off. And so Western exploration as a history teacher was really my favorite thing. And one day I was up there just kind of ranting on about how cool it must have been to have lived in a country back in a period of time where if you wanted to reinvent yourself, or you were just tired of the status quo, you could just point yourself west and take off and have adventures and create a whole new life for you. And I'm ranting on and rambling on up there about that. And Weeble sitting in the back of the room during a rare moment of silence while I was catching my breath, said louder than he meant to, "Well, if you think it's so cool, why don't you go do it yourself?"
Yeah. Yeah.
And it was an epiphany. It was like, boom.
The
And
proverbial
no, it really
light.
doesn't look a bad idea.
Yeah.
Yeah, the lights went off. And so it took me about a year to pull everything together, to find sponsors, to save some money, to put my life in order, or perhaps in disorder, and get everything together so that I could go do it. But the closer that it came to it, the more I started thinking, what am I doing here? I've got a great job. I live in a cottage on a lake. Life is good. I've got the summers to do what I want, and I had a girlfriend, and, what am I doing here? And had it not been for the fact that I did a lot of training walks, I'd walk highways and stuff between Elkhart, Indiana and South Bend, Indiana. My endpoint would always be the Notre Dame campus. And people started noticing this more and more. And the next thing you know, a local radio station, WSBT, asked me to come in to do a one-off interview about my training and what I was going to do and all that sort of stuff. So I went into the station and sat down and did the interview, talking much like you and I are right now. And by the time I walked out that afternoon, all of a sudden I had a weekly radio gig. Hey, call in from the road, find a phone, call in. Let's see what we can turn this thing into. And so that's what I did for the whole way across. But the point of this being, had it not been for that radio show and me basically broadcasting to all of northern Indiana and southern Michigan that I was going to go do this thing, I might have chickened out. But I felt like I had so much at that point. Went ahead and did it. But once I got out there actually doing it, going across the state of North Carolina in those early days, practically every day, I just thought, my goodness, what am I doing out here? And I had all these self-doubts about what I had just done.
Yeah. That's incredible right there. You hail from Indiana. Of course, Indiana is a major sports state. We'll get into the major sport from Indiana, in my opinion, here in just a second. But another character, another student in your class, Colleen. She said something or posed a question that was very poignant to me. She said, "Why do you always leave? Why do you feel the need, or why did you at that point feel the need to go on these adventures prior to, of course, your big walk? But why did you feel the need to go and leave during the summers?"
Well, I was, and I guess to a certain extent still am, one of those guys, and and gals. There's a lot of people out there that are like this, increasingly so. I just had an itch that I wanted to scratch. Some people would call it being an adrenaline junkie, and there was certainly that aspect to it. And in addition to that, I was just curious about what was out there. I grew up in a wonderful environment in a small town farming community in southern Indiana. It was great. But I also realized very early on that there was a big world out there, and I wanted to see it. And whatever it took to give me the opening to go do that, I was going to do it. And so I just had to scratch that itch.
Excellent. We also just spoke about family. How did taking the walk and even previous adventures settle with your family? That's girlfriend as well.
That's a great question. Because I'd been doing this so long, and I'd been stretching the boundaries a bit farther and farther each time that I did it. I'm a popular guy here this afternoon for some reason.
Hey, it's all good. Let it ring. Hey, We'll talk over it.
I lost my train of thought here.
You've been stretching the boundaries as far as your adventure.
Yeah, each of these things got continually a little bit more outrageous. And I don't know, I can't say that I was purposely conditioning my folks to this, but by just stretching it a little bit farther and a little bit farther each time, by the time I came home and announced to my parents that I was going to quit my job and walk across the country, they were probably the only two people in my life that didn't look at me like I was totally nuts. Everybody else thought I was nuts. Everybody. But they, I guess they'd almost been waiting for the other shoe to drop, particularly my father, who, to go back to his story again, he was an older man when World War II came around, a teacher, a child. He was not ever going to get drafted into the military service, but he went ahead and joined up, volunteered to fight for our country during World War II. And I think he innately understood that sometimes there's just some things that happen to you in life where you just feel like you've got to go do it. And
got to go. Yeah.
And you got to do it. And he was just very accepting of it. So all the way across, they were just really, really helpful and acceptant. Hence the phone calls home when I was having a down day or felt blue about what it was that I was doing. They would never fail but to offer me encouragement. But like I said, everybody else, are you nuts? Why are you doing this? Heard it over and over.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. When I think of Indiana sports, the major export here is basketball.
Yes, sir.
And there is the stage is being set where women's college basketball's preeminent player right now, Caitlin Clark, she has declared for the WNBA, and since then, she has broken Pistol Pete Maravich's record for D1 points scored. And guess who happens to have the #1 pick in the WNBA this coming year? The Indiana Fever.
That's right.
Your thoughts on Miss Clark possibly becoming a member of the Fever?
Oh, I love it. You may have already seen this just today. It was announced that, the draft hasn't even happened yet, but already Gainbridge, who is the marquee sponsor of the basketball arena there in Indianapolis where the Fever play, they've signed her to a long-term personal services contract, and she hasn't even been drafted by the Fever yet. So that kind of shows you, where that's going, which is great. I mean, there's a player of just exceptional ability going to a basketball crazy state. It's just a dream come true, I think, for everybody concerned in this. In the state of Indiana, and outside of the state of Iowa, where she obviously rules the roost, I can't think of a place where she would fit in better than another largely rural agricultural state that's basketball mad, like in Indiana. In a way, all the comparisons are with right now with Pete Maravich, justifiably. But when I think about this and her going to play for the Fever, I think more about Larry Bird and the long-term effect that he's had on the state throughout his career. I think, in a sense, more than being a female Pistol Pete Maravich going forward in the state of Indiana, she's going to be a female Larry Bird.
Excellent. Yeah, and to be honest, all three of the people that you just named, excellent shooters, excellent handlers of the ball, and more than excellent passers of the ball as well. Hey, we're gonna have to come back on and do some sports as well. So yes, sir. Yes, sir. what was also interesting to me about the state of Indiana's affinity for Caitlin Clark is the men. The NBA's Indiana Pacers even sent kudos to her in breaking the all-time D1 points scored mark. Well, that's an excellent segue. We'll talk about pace setting here shortly. To everyone that is listening via streaming or downloading via your favorite podcasting platform, we definitely appreciate you tuning in with us. We have author Mr. Stephan Foust, the author of the novel A Leaf in the Stream. As we go to part two, first up, you wrote 2 books on music, and this was crazy for me to understand. It's like this dude is like the Forrest Gump of my life. But we'll get to that Forrest Gump situation here in just a moment. But you wrote 2 books on music, the Learn from the Legend series. How did that come about?
Well, my wife is a professional musician and is also a faculty member at Vanderbilt University's Blair School of Music. And teaching is close to her heart, obviously. Teaching is close to my heart. And she lives and breathes music, and I live and breathe an appreciation of music, all forms. I can't even play good radio myself, but I have a great appreciation for all genres of music. And she and I were talking one evening about a project that we could perhaps do together. And we just got to thinking about more of it from my viewpoint of how, as a kid, I loved music, but I never had any confidence in myself that I could be a musician. That's Paul McCartney. I'm not Paul McCartney. That's Mick Jagger. I'm not Mick Jagger. I just never had any confidence. And I know there's a lot of kids out there that are the same way. They look at their musical heroes of today and think, well, that's Beyonce. I'm not Beyonce. Well, maybe they are Beyonce and they just don't know it. And that kind of triggered it. So we decided that we would work together on these books. And what we would do is we would go out and interview all these older rock and roll icons, Billy Joel, Bruce Hornsby, Greg Allman, Michael McDonald. The list goes on and on from there. But we thought, if we could somehow tap into this, then my part of the book would be interviewing these people and asking them what they were like when they were kids at the period of time when they discovered music and why it was they went into it and what mistakes they made and what things they did right and all that sort of thing. And then Karen, my wife's part of the interview, would be sitting down with them and playing together on keyboards so that they could figure out drills and licks that they could do to teach students, so that if they wanted to learn how to play like Billy Joel or, again, Michael McDonald or any of these guys, they could practice these drills over and over. So the books are 2 pieces, the interview backstory part of it and then the instructional part of it. And they seem to work real well. And we got a lot of people who signed on to be interviewed just because they liked the concept of it. Learned a lot.
Interview / tutorial. Yeah. It is that is an awesome concept. Okay, so the aforementioned Forrest Gump adage. Okay, so you just name dropped some killers in the music industry. And then you walked across country. There is a striking resemblance to Forrest Gump. Is this, I don't necessarily want to ask, is this movie based on you? But how do you feel about the symmetry there?
Well, yes, the book has nothing to do with me whatsoever, or the movie and the book that preceded. It has nothing to do with me. That came completely from the imagination of the author. But when I saw the movie, I was blown away by how accurately they got what parts of that experience were like, where Foust is running back and forth across the country repeatedly. It wasn't that far from the movie was not that far from the reality that I discovered. People would just come out of nowhere to contact me and find me. And that was demonstrated in the movie by those groups of people that would follow Foust around. Now, I never had a group of people who followed me around, but I did have, in a lot of different situations, individuals that would seek me out and then walk for a day or part of a day with me, where we would just talk about life and things like that. It would not be unusual. In all seriousness, it would not be unusual, because there was a lot of media in front of me. I did this on purpose because I thought it would make my trip more interesting and also easier. So anytime I had an opportunity to do a newspaper or a radio or a television interview, I did it, knowing that by the time I would actually reach a community or whatever, that there'd be this wave of publicity in front of me, and I would be walking into a community not as some dirty, disheveled stranger that maybe you should be afraid of and keep your children away from. Instead, what happened is that people would go, "Oh, there's that guy. Yeah. I just read an article on him, or I heard an interview with him, or blah, blah, blah." And they would seek me out. And it got so outrageous that it would not be unusual through the Great Plains, where things are pretty stretched out anyway, where people would drive as much as 150 miles one way just to find me alongside a highway or a road and bring me a piece of pie, or ask me to spend the evening at their house and things like that. It was amazing. So the Forrest Gump experience was, I was blown away. It just, how could the movie makers not have experienced that, yet they got it right?
Even had state troopers bringing you milkshakes.
Yes, which when I was walking across the Utah and Nevada salt flats, and the temperature was, 110, 115, no shade in sight, pretty rough stretch of country. There was a Utah State Patrol officer who took me under his wing because I was on his route, and I would walk within scene distance of I-80. And when he would come along on his patrol every day, when he saw me, he would stop, blurp his siren, and I would leave my trail and come over to the side of the road, and he would bring a jumbo size chocolate milkshake that he kept in his cooler all day, especially for me. And I can't tell you how delicious that was.
We'll get into that, the third aspect, the long way home. We'll get into that third part of your book here in just a moment. First, I want to get into part 2. Now, we were talking about music there for a second, and part 2, the section is titled Reality Sets In. And then in chapter 17, Voices in My Head. That was, I don't know, I took a personal liking to that part of the book, because I'm a walker. Now, in no way am I walking 3,000 miles. I probably haven't walked 3,000 miles in my life, but I'll walk a good, sometimes in my stretches, I'll walk 4 to 6 miles, and really, I'll just have my music on, and I'll have these conversations with myself. And what I truly learned from this is the connection between your mind and your physical self. My question to you is, what were those conversations like? How did you continue to propel yourself to want to continue and finish what you set out to do?
Well, that's really a two-part question there. And to answer the first part of it is the one constant thing is that if you're spending 98% of your time alone walking,
Mm-hmm.
the tape loop goes round and round in your head. And when you're in a positive frame of mind, that's not such a bad thing. It can be inspirational, it can be motivational, all those good kind of things. Long distance runners and go through, I think, the same sort of thing. The dangerous part of it is when you're having a bad day, are you struggling mentally and perhaps physically too because of the elements, or maybe you're having a bout of blisters or something like that I was prone to having. But when that tape loop is negative, oh boy, it can get really self-destructive, and that's when it was tough to keep going. And you also ask, well, how did I keep going during those times? Honestly, and I don't. This is hard for me to admit, even to this day. I don't know whether this is a good thing or a bad thing. It's the truth. It's just how I am. The only thing worse than the bad days, the really, really bad days when I wanted to quit, was the idea of going home with my tail tucked between my legs and facing that humiliation. I hate to feel humiliated. I mean, most people do.
Amen.
But
Amen.
It was such an extreme with me that I would have, and I'm not exaggerating here, I would have rather died out there than faced humiliation. And in the very final, most minute analysis of the whole thing, that's what kept me going during the bad times. Yet, that said, at critical times, like the state police officer in the desert in Utah, there were always people who showed up when I needed them. And sometimes I didn't even know I needed them, but then I would find out that really, truly, I did need them. I called them, I don't know whether you're a Hobbit aficionado or not, a Lord of the Rings aficionado, but I would call them my Gandalfs, because Gandalf, the wizard in the Lord of the Rings trilogy and the Hobbit, Gandalf would never show up unless one of the hobbits really needed him. And that was my experience too. These wonderful people that would come up and help me and in one way or the other, either physically or mentally, help me get to the next stage.
The Most High will provide. My Southern roots, my Tennessee roots, that's where my mind goes. The Most High will indeed provide. And I also, in part 3, when we get to part 3, I definitely wanted to know more about some of the people that you met along the way. Real quick, the second major export out of Indiana is racing. We spoke about pace setting there for a moment. Now, there's a difference apparently between NASCAR, Formula One, and Indianapolis 500 style of racing.
IndyCar
racing.
It's called IndyCar.
Yeah. And one of the biggest. So my first question is I want to know, from a major racing guy like you are, what are those differences? If you can just, give us a couple of them. And then your thoughts on Lewis Hamilton switching over to Ferrari.
I've got opinions on all that. As an Indiana kid, outside of basketball, the biggest sport in the state is auto racing, particularly back when I grew up. It was a couple hour drive to Indianapolis, so I started going there as a kid to the 500 track. Dirt track racing and short oval racing is very popular in the state, and there's these little bullpen tracks all over the place, drag strips. I as a kid all the way through my adult years, auto racing's just been a big part of it, and I was blessed to actually cover IndyCar and NASCAR racing for about a 10-year period. I've been to that particular track. Oh, I can't even count the times. 50 actual races, and so it's just kind of in my blood. The difference among the three types is pretty profound. Formula One, for example, is the most sophisticated technology available in the world, with the rules built around that kind of constant innovation and reinvention. And it's done with open wheel cars, all on road and street courses. NASCAR primarily is, you can't really call them stock cars anymore. They're not. Once upon a time, they were stock cars. Now they're more or less spec racers that have a skin on them that kind of sort of looks like a stock car. They're primarily oval track racing with a certain amount of road racing. And IndyCar racing is open cockpit racing on a combination of circuits, ovals, which is the tradition, and street courses and road courses. A street course being like the way the Nashville IndyCar race has been the last 3 years, and it's going to convert and go back to being a oval race on the concrete out at the Lebanon Speedway, Super Speedway, here soon. To give you a difference between Formula One, even though the cars kind of sort of look the same, the rules in IndyCar are meant to keep the cars in a very narrow technological framework, much more narrow than is the case with Formula One. And to give you an example how that plays out in terms of costs, for Ferrari, that you mentioned before, for Ferrari to race for an entire season, in terms of car development and everything else, it costs Ferrari. It's getting up closer and closer to $1 billion a season, which is just unbelievable. Ferrari a couple of years ago, last time I really looked at the statistics, was sending 500 million a season. A typical Indy car, even though again they kind of look the same, they'll spend 30 million total for a year.
And I'm a complete novice because I thought they were the same.
Yeah, and they're really not. Indy cars are a much more, in terms of aerodynamics and the basic technology, there's a lot of similarity, but Formula One cars are much more sophisticated in terms of what they can do. A Formula One car can go from a standing stop to 100 miles an hour in less than 3 seconds. That's how powerful they are. But on the other hand, an Indy car couldn't do that. They have rolling starts, but a Formula One car can't go 240 miles an hour down a straightaway. So
give and take.
They've got more top end speed than a Formula One car, but a Formula One car has a lot more torque, is a lot more nimble, has a lot more sophisticated technological tricks to it. And you can argue forever who has the best drivers. An IndyCar fan like me will say there's not that much difference. A Formula One aficionado will basically say, no way. the people that drive those Formula One cars are as sophisticated as the cars that they drive, and that's a strong argument.
Wow. Wow. Your thoughts on Lewis Hamilton leaving Mercedes and going over to Ferrari? Do you think now is this a super team now? Is he I don't know, is he now going to be unbeatable even more than he already has been in the past?
Well, that potential certainly there. We'll see how it plays out. Now, bear in mind, Lewis Hamilton actually hasn't won a race in over 2 years. Some people would say that's because he's starting to get his racing drivers go a little bit long in the tooth. Maybe not. Technologically, his cars have not performed these last couple of years up to the levels that they had in the past. And so the hope is, in Ferrari circles and Lewis Hamilton circles is that he's got a lot left in the gas tank, and switching teams and going to Ferrari, who, if you look back on the history of Ferrari, is by far, without question, the most successful manufacturer of Formula One racing cars going back to the very beginning, that the team together, these two will really put both of them back on top again. We'll see. I don't know. I'm as curious as anybody.
I can dig it.
It's going to be fun to watch.
I'm sorry?
It's going to be fun to watch.
Indeed. I just remember a period of time, and now that you say it's been 2 years, it's almost like, wow. But I remember a period of time okay, so I'm an avid football fan. And of course, ESPN goes from, their ESPN football, morning show to Formula One a lot of the times. And every time I would, just flip back, Lewis Hamilton would be in the winner's circle. It seems like every Sunday, that's what happened. And to your point that it's 2 years ago, I can't believe it now, but yeah, like that. He was an amazing driver, even from a novice perspective. I'm like, wow, this guy is winning every week. But yeah,
one of the arguments that you get into between Formula One fans and IndyCar fans is that because there's so much technological innovation and stuff like that goes on, when some manufacturer gets ahead of the game, or they figured something out aerodynamically or in their engine or something else that is superior to all the other teams, and you pair that superior car with that superior driver, then the races end up looking like a parade. The same winner every year, very few passes. In a typical Formula One season, and a typical IndyCar season, there will be more passes for position in a single IndyCar race than there will be for the entire season in a Formula One race. And it boils down to technology largely. And so that's, but again, you're going to get fans on both sides that are going to argue back and forth which is the superior thing to watch and whether they get the most enjoyment out of.
Excellent. To everyone viewing us on socials, we definitely appreciate you. Make sure you also go and download and stream via any reputable podcasting platform. Just search Surround Sound Podcast. That's right. We're on Apple, Google, Spotify, iHeartRadio app, of course. Just go and check us out. The Long Way Home, Part 3, chapters 62, 61, and 64. You met some rather incredible people, as you already preluded to. You've met some incredible people. And you, as you were talking about the state trooper, I want to say that chapter was entitled Purgatory, and he gave you the option to quit, to go home if you want to stop, whatever, what have you, because you didn't take the easy route. As I was looking, you went over, as I was looking the course that you took, you went over the Smokies, you went over the Ozarks, you went over the Rockies, you went over the desert in Nevada, but you didn't quit. Tell us about one of the more poignant people that you met during your time in Nevada and in the desert.
In Nevada,
right?
Where I think you probably want me to go with this is the story about the English teachers. That
was that Utah or was that Nevada?
That was Nevada.
Okay, yeah.
Okay, a bit of a backstory here so that people understand this. Since I was doing this weekly radio show from the road via remote with the technology that existed back then, basically a telephone, I was always looking for stories. So what became my habit is that anytime I was interviewed by a local reporter, be it newspaper, radio, or television, I would always engage them in conversation about, well, do you know any interesting people or interesting situations that might make good material for me for my radio show? And that never failed to put me on to some interesting people. So I was in the state of Nevada, walking through the desert and the desert communities of Nevada, which is a state where, you may know, 19 counties in the state of Nevada have legalized prostitution.
Okay.
Most of them are smaller communities along I-80 and that area. But when I got to this one small town in Nevada that go nameless, I met a local reporter in a local cafe to do an interview, and after he got what he needed, then I asked him my question, and he said, yeah, there is one person in town that I've always wanted to interview. She belongs to my church, but she won't do an interview with anybody locally, but I suspect she just might do one with you because I know she wants to tell her story so people understand her, and maybe, just maybe, she'd be willing to go on a live radio show that was broadcast 2,000 miles away in Indiana, because it wouldn't create any ripple effect for her here. And what her backstory is that she was a local high school English teacher, a widow. She'd been a teacher there for years, an avid churchgoer. She was also a sponsor of the Home Ec Club, a real pillar of the community. And that was her day job. And her night job was, when she left school every day, she went to the local brothel and was the night manager of the local brothel.
Okay, so let me ask you a question real quick. Okay, first of all, she's a teacher.
Mm-hmm.
And she goes to church.
Mm-hmm. Have a church.
Okay, so you used a very poignant word. You said night manager. Is that kind of like the madam?
That's exactly what the madam is.
So she, church-going teacher, madam. The irony here that I saw, in reading the book, is that home ec, this home ec situation, like, that's just ironic to me. Nonetheless, her story.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So you can imagine.
Sorry,
I thought,
but I just wanted to make sure that was clear.
I really wanted to tell her story. Now, again, this is 1980, but I wasn't even sure they were going to let this story go on the air on live radio back in the conservative state of Indiana, but they went for it. So I decided to go for it too. So we made arrangements for her to meet me at the brothel in her office to do this live radio from her office phone upstairs. So after giving me a brief tour of the premises, which is another story in itself, we went upstairs to her office, where she was actually very excited to tell me the backstory as to how all this came to be. Another thing you have to know here is that small town Nevadans at the time back then, I found Nevadans to be among the most interesting people by and large, all the way across the country on the walk, and it was because there's not a lot in Nevada, particularly in those smaller desert communities. By and large, people live there because they want to.
Wow.
And
so if there's not a lot.
Yes. And because they want to, and there's that assumption, they assume that you're there for a reason too. And your reason is none of their personal business. It's your personal business. Thank you very much. Live and let live. That's kind of the prevailing attitude, which had a lot to do with why she could be a church-going woman, teach at a local high school, and also be a madam at a brothel. In fact, the woman that hired her was also the owner of the brothel, was also an avid churchgoer. And the story is that this woman that I interviewed, the madam, had grown up in that community. And so from the time she was a little girl growing up, she had occasionally, at a store or something like that, run across these ladies of the evening when they had time off and went to a grocery store or a clothing store or something like that. And she had always wondered about them and always been curious about them. And had always kind of felt sorry, feeling like they were kind of just lost souls. So she comes back to her hometown to teach, marries, has a good, long, nice career as a teacher, and then her husband gets killed suddenly in an automobile accident, and she's just kind of lost and directionless. And the woman that actually owned the brothel saw her at church repeatedly and saw how lost she was becoming. And she had a feeling. So she offered this teacher the night job. And what her thinking was, and what the teacher quickly figured out on her own, is that she could help these girls. She could teach them life skills. She could teach them English skills. She could teach them all kinds of necessary skills that most of these young women, having had a bad upbringing, didn't have. And so the idea that an English teacher, who also was a home ec sponsor, actually fit in perfectly. And she found purpose in her life again, and began to feel that what she was really doing, from her point of view, was God's will. She was helping these young women find something else. And that's why she did it. And that's why she continued to do it.
That's awesome.
And so the whole thing of who's a real Christian in a scenario where ladies of the evening are chastised and marginalized, are this woman that was rolling up her sleeves and getting in there and helping. I came away from that interview. I didn't know what I was going to encounter, how I was going to feel about it when I was done with it. But I came away with such respect for that woman and her approach to life that it really came as a great surprise. It was one of the best moments for me on that entire walk.
That is an incredible story, and your stream of thought there is rather incredible as well. How you came to the thought process like, oh yeah, she's a real Christian. She's literally getting out there with the people, with those possible persons that may be lost, euphemistically here, and very ironic being that you're you're walking across country, being with those that are lost in that sense.
And what came out of it for me in that very same regard is that before in my life, I had been a teacher and a coach who was sticking a foot into the world of journalism and enjoying it, but I was still first and foremost a teacher and a coach, and who then became a walker that had a radio show. And so I'm getting into it deeper and deeper. But when I interviewed this woman and had such a incredible conversation with her, it was a turning point for me too, because, by this stage of the walk, I'm starting to think, well, what am I going to do when I'm done with this? What am I going to turn this into? That's when I really decided at that point, well, boy, if I can do an interview like this, maybe that's the direction I should go with my life. So in a way, and I'm sure she would not have been aware of this, she helped me find myself too.
That's awesome. That's awesome. I definitely, since I got you here, I definitely want to ask you about, journalistic integrity. One thing that I always learn, and I actually pride myself in what I do with this thought process, is that you're supposed to be even-handed. How do you feel about the current state of media, where you can go to your possibly in theory, you can go to your left-wing news source, or you can go to your right-wing news source. How do you see and view the landscape of media as it is right now?
Well, to me, the real issue isn't the fact that there's left-wing or there's right-wing media outlets out there. I mean, the truth of it, if you look back and you study American journalism as a whole, and dating all the way back to the birth of the newspaper, communities always had newspapers that presented ideas and events from a particular point of view. I mean, even me growing up in the 50s in small town Indiana, my hometown had a Republican oriented daily newspaper, and it had a Democratic oriented newspaper. And my father taught me to do this. He subscribed to both news and was in fact the Republican county chairman at the time. He said the only way you can really get an idea of the truth is to read both, Amen. Consume both, and then ask the proper questions afterwards. And I've carried that with me my entire life. So the idea that you might have a right-wing oriented cable news network out there, and you might have a left-leaning one as well, that doesn't bother me at all. That's just kind of the history of American journalism. And I might add, in this day and age, you can also find those journalistic organizations out there who play it straight down the middle and do their best to do that. So my point of view on this is it's not what's available, it's how you choose to consume it. And you start, in my view, you start to get into trouble as a news consumer is if you only allow yourself to watch those that you just happen to agree with, because that becomes an echo chamber and just reinforces your opinions and doesn't necessarily help you grow and really discover facts. If all you're going to watch is a right wing, you're going to start to think that, hey, I just said it. It's consumption to me. I try to look at it all so that I can come up with what I think is a reasonable perspective. Does that answer your question?
It does. It not only does it answer my question, it relates back to something that I read possibly like my first, second semester of college. It said it was on the back of a book. It said, you don't truly know your argument unless you know your opponents.
Exactly.
And that's what you said. You know, when in consuming information, make sure you know all the different backgrounds of the people that are giving it to you, and you'll then truly find the truth. My last question. I'm sorry. Go ahead. Yes, sir. Go ahead, Mr. Foust.
Well, yeah, I basically was just going to reiterate what you say. You know, this is just me and my personal opinion, but I already know what's inside my head. I already know how I think. I don't need to have somebody tell me, "Oh, you're right," or reinforce that. I'm much more interested in hearing points of view that run counter to what I may think, because who knows? Maybe they're right. Maybe I need to be listening to this, or maybe the truth is somewhere in between the two.
True. Very true. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. My last question in reference to a leaf in the stream. At your lowest point, at your just most lowest point, did you ever think that death possibly was in question?
Oh, absolutely. And that happened in several different occasions under several different sets of circumstances. I managed to get myself caught out in a very bad electrical storm in the Great Plains, where I was the tallest thing with a metal backpack frame on for 40 miles in any direction. And those bolts of lightning and hitting the ground and coming towards me, I had a couple of hours to just watch this coming towards me. And I really wasn't sure I was going to survive it. You know, I had to throw my metal frame backpack out in the cornfield and huddle down in a drainage ditch that was filled up with running. I really, I could smell the ozone in the air, and some of the strikes were very, very close. And I just thought, man, it's over. I got myself caught out in a blizzard in Colorado, and I'm not sure how that would have come out had it not been for the fact, and this is amazing to me. I'd had lunch earlier in the day in a cafe in this small eastern Colorado town with a Mennonite couple. And the wife was very, very pregnant. We just had lunch together. That was all. Talked for a little while. They walked me out the door and went to their car and drove off, and I continued it out into the prairie. Weather forecasting wasn't what it is now, and I got caught in this horrible blizzard. One of the worst in recorded history in Colorado, as a matter of fact. And this couple, at their own volition, at the worst of this, with a pregnant wife, this couple drove out in this blizzard and found me on a road and plucked me off and took me back to safety in their home. They probably saved my life.
Yeah, definitely.
And there were a couple of other situations that most of my threats, most of the things that really scared me and could have, potentially taken my life. There was a tornado in Arkansas, same thing. Most of the threats were weather related, not human related. I'm happy to say. I did have dicey situations with some ne'er-do-wells, but the worst situations were weather related.
That's awesome. That's absolutely awesome.
To this day, To this day, I'm surprised at my stupidity of constantly thinking, well, I really need to be making some mileage here and forging on when I should have just paid attention to the skies and stayed where I was. I
Yeah.
just never did seem to get that lesson.
Hey. The one thing there that I truly take from it and understand just in my own journey of life is that people at their core, although we bicker, and when I say we, I'm talking about people around the world, may bicker about the smallest things. When it comes to actually helping our fellow man or woman, we really do try our best to aid that person, and that
And
is a beautiful thing.
and
Last
honestly,
word,
honestly,
Mr. Foust,
honestly,
on how you feel about what you learned. What did you learn? What
well,
if you can quantify, like, what's the main thing that you learned?
two things. One is exactly what you just said. In fact, it was a motivator for why I finally decided to tell the story after all these years. I came away from this experience convinced, more so than ever, of the fact that people, Americans, are basically good, and we basically agree on all of the most important stuff out there, and but we're for all kinds of reasons, we're living in a time right now where that sort of agreement seems to be a very difficult thing to do, and 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 I know from the way these countless people opened up their hearts and their homes and their generosity uh, to me that people are basically good, and I wanted this book to sort of serve as a reminder of that in some small way. That hey, we really we really live in a great country with great people, and that's not being Pollyannish because evil has always existed and it's out there, but by and large, the good outrules the evil uh, most of the
Yeah,
time, and
I definitely
I
agree.
guess the other thing that I really learned, and I've touched on this too, is just um, opening up one's ears and eyes and listening to what the other guy has to say,
Yeah,
and let them tell you their story, like the teacher madam in Nevada. Just you know, listen for a little while and let them tell you their story, and then see what kind of effects that has on you.
excellent. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. In just a moment, for those that are listening and viewing, we'll get into the sign of the times. The title is The Big Ticket. This is when I give you just a segment, a snippet of what I learned this week. And of course, with no doubt, it'll be relating to our conversation here with Mr. Stephan Foust, author of A Leaf in the Stream. Mr. Foust, lastly, this is your third book, so I'm sure that we got a fourth, fifth, sixth book coming up. What are those titles? What you got working and brewing on?
Well, I'm working on. I'm getting in the final stages of a third book, a novel once again, but also based on events of the past, and it's entitled Under the Halloween Moon. And this being a sports show, is about these guys.
Okay, so
You see
football players.
that?
Who are those guys there?
It's about a youth football team in
Okay.
1961 in rural Indiana, and it focuses on primarily on two of the players, best friends,
Mhm.
and what happens to them during this very uh, fundamentally full of change, juvenile adolescent year when they're both 13 and playing football for this team surrounded by their buddies. And they have they have a best friend, a girl who's probably not probably was undoubtedly the best athlete of the three, and
Wow.
it's their story how they grow up during the course of this. So one of their fathers dies, and they have to deal with that. One of them happens to be a very talented musician, and he's at the point where he's really got to make a decision between concentrating on being an athlete or being a musician. He's really, really good at both, and so it's a coming of age story about junior high age kids, but it's written for adults.
Excellent, excellent. We'll definitely be on the lookout for it. To say the least, whatever platform I'm on, you definitely have the open door to come and be on that platform if you so choose to do so.
Thank you.
Mr. Foust, I must say, just in getting ready for this interview, I didn't know that we had so much in common. For me, my journey was going overseas, and you were definitely a person that was a proponent of me doing study abroad when I was in my last semesters last summer in college. So I definitely appreciate that. And then just to relate back to your new assignment, your new book that'll be coming out here shortly, I was like, some way, somehow, we're going to get Indiana's third favorite sport in this show. And that's definitely football. I didn't know how, but we got it in there. So I'm definitely happy for that.
Me too. It's this has been a fun hour, Ruben. I'm so glad we're doing this.
No problem. Lastly, Mr. Foust, how can people go and get A Leaf in the Stream? How can they purchase that book?
It's pretty simple. You can just go to Amazon books and type in Stephen Foust, A Leaf in the Stream, and it'll pop right up. And you have the option of buying it either as the soft copy book that you just held up at the start of the show, or you can also take the link and get the audio version of the book, which thankfully isn't voiced by me. It's voiced by a wonderful voice actor out of Boston who reads the book. So it's available in either of those two forms.
Excellent. Well, Mr. Stephen Foust, I once again, I definitely appreciate your time, your information, and your energy for the life of the time that I've known you. I'm truly indebted to you and others from taking your classes. Yes, sir.
Well, we've been friends since we first met in my class more years ago now than probably either of us want to admit. And
Yeah.
It's great to add this new level to it by actually getting on the air together and having some fun. I've just thoroughly enjoyed this hour.
Hey, excellent, Mr. Foust. I definitely appreciate you. You have an excellent rest of your day, and yeah, we'll keep in touch. Next time your book comes out, definitely come on back on.
Yes, sir. I look forward to that.
Excellent.
Thanks again, my friend.
Hey, no problem at all, Mr. Foust. All right, time for the sign of the times. Where do I start? As you heard, Stephen Foust, professor at MTSU. I took Mr. Foust for News 1 and News 2. And I must say to 3 other individuals, a big thank you to all 4 of you guys. Janine Farmer, Belinda Hudgens Noblet, and Forrest Sanders. If not for these three individuals, I may still be in school right now. And then with the tutelage of Mr. Stephen Foust, hey, I ended up graduating and doing what I am now. Well, the sign of the times for this week, the title is The Big Ticket. Now, my first frame of reference when it comes to tickets are two things. The first is Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, where the lead character wins this ticket to go to his favorite source of candy. And he goes, and we know the story and all that happened there. That was his big ticket. Secondly, you have the big ticket, Mr. Kevin Garnett, the guy that started a whole wave of jumping from high school to the NBA. His nickname, KG, amongst others, the big ticket, he was a lot of people's ticket out of more lean times. Well, the thing about that is they knew where their ticket was and where it was taking them to. Mr. Foust, or should I say Jonathan in A Leaf in the Stream, it was a lot of indecision there. Jonathan didn't necessarily know right offhand that this would be something positive for him. But you know what? He listened to individuals that were more than likely half of his age. I remember my father saying something back when I was growing up. He would always say, you always got to listen to somebody sometimes. My preacher at the time reiterated that very same sentiment, saying a broke clock is right at least twice a day. See, Mr. Stephen Foust is a teacher's teacher. You know how they have coaches in sports that we call a teammate or a player's coach? See, Mr. Foust was a student's teacher. He wasn't afraid of the challenge from Weeble and Critter. He wasn't afraid of the thought process that Colleen was issuing to why he was leaving. He took it in, absorbed it, and it made him a better person. As we talked about today, he truly understood what his ticket was and what it was all about. See, steel sharpens steel, as we saw with the Nevada matter. Although he may not be of Mennonite religiously, he understood that them helping him was of the greater good, not for necessarily of himself, but the story that he would eventually put out for our understanding. Once again, I thank our guest for today, Mr. Stephen Foust. He's helped me in ways he may never know. For everyone here at the Surround Sound Podcast, we thank you for tuning in each and every Wednesday at 9 a.m. And in the words of the scholar, Jerry Springer, be good to yourself and each other.